We're in Mark chapter 3 today. As we begin here, I want you to think about something. I will have a confession for you this morning. As your preacher, as a Christian man, a husband and father, all the things that I do, I have a guilty pleasure. And that guilty pleasure is the football coach's press conference where he loses his cool. Every time I see one of these on TV, I'm intrigued by it. I want to rewind it and watch it again. There have been some over the course of time that have become almost a piece of pop culture. I remember when I was a kid, Jim Mora was being interviewed in a press conference. I think he was the coach of the Colts at the time, if I remember right. And somebody asked him about his team making the playoffs, and his response was, "Playoffs?" And he went into this whole rant about how they were nowhere near thinking about playoffs. This past week, maybe a week or two ago now, I introduced my wife to, I'm a man, I'm 40. And the Oklahoma State fans, or probably the Oklahoma fans, know exactly what I'm talking about. Mike Gundy, probably 10 years ago, something like that. The Oklahoma State coach was upset because the press was writing something about his quarterback in the newspaper. And he went on this tirade, and he just got angrier and angrier throughout, or at least it seemed that way. I almost felt like I was there for the halftime pep talk. And he was talking about how these guys shouldn't go off on this 18-year-old kid, and he's just a kid. And he finally reached the point where it's a crescendo of, "I'm a man, I'm 40, come after me." And we laughed watching that press conference the other day. There are people, and I almost did this morning, but I didn't want to just turn you in one direction right away. There are people that if you were to see them get up with a microphone and begin to speak, you will have already decided what you think before a word has come out of their mouth. If I put a picture of Biden up here this morning, if I put a picture of Trump up here this morning, you have already decided what's going to happen before they've begun to speak. If I put a picture of your coach or my coach up there, I think of Nick Saban. It's good that I like the press conference when someone loses their cool because that's a weekly thing in my world. I did not like him at all when he coached LSU. I thought he was a crazy, angry man. And now that he coaches my team, it's A-okay. It's funny how your opinion can change that quickly about somebody. Jesus experiences that over and over again in Mark 3. There are people who encounter him, and before they have encountered him at all, had a word come out of his mouth, seen anything that he's done, they have already decided. And Mark lets us in on quite a bit of that, of why they're there, what they're thinking, what their purpose is. And so I want you to think about, as we encounter Jesus in several ways this morning, what we would do if we encountered him, why we would be there, what our opinion would be. Would we listen? Are we willing to hear what he has to say? And I'll tell you one other thing before we begin. If you have looked ahead in Mark 3, down near the end of the chapter, you will find the unforgivable sin, the blasphemy of the Spirit. We're not going to talk about that. So don't think too far ahead. I will tell you, though, and we may talk about it some other time, but we're not going to do it today. I will tell you, if you're concerned about it, you are most likely not doing it. The people who have committed blasphemy of the Spirit have so dismissed the work of God that it's no longer a concern. So if you're worried about it, if you look at something that says the unforgivable sin and think, "Oh, by all means, I don't want to do that," you're probably in good shape. So Mark chapter 3, we'll start in verse 1. It says, "Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him." So first of all, we will see they watched him. And Mark starts off with this "they," and this is not the way we're taught to do this in writing. You're supposed to have the actual subject somewhere along the way so you know what the "they" refers back to. Mark's going to give you the "they" later, and we're going to learn that it's the Pharisees, the scribes, teachers of law, those folks that are there, and they are there to watch. And they are not there to watch in such a way that says, "I want him to do well." Nathan is in the play at Ada High School this weekend. We went to see it back before COVID shut it down in the fall. And I will tell you, when we're watching Nathan in the play, we are not watching hoping he will trip over something. We're not watching hoping he will flub the line. We're not watching hoping something bad will happen. We're watching hoping everything he's practiced, everything he's worked for, this is going to go well. And we have people like this in our lives, don't we? We have people who, when they see us, they wish the best for us. They hope it will all go well. And we have people in our lives, unfortunately, that see us and think, "Oh, I can't wait till they get what's coming to them. I can't wait till they get theirs. I can't wait till they fall." And unfortunately, we do this with others too, don't we? We see those people and those names I mentioned to you at the beginning even. We could go far beyond that. But there are people that we want the best for, and there are people, even as Christians, that we struggle with not wanting those people to fall. As these folks are here with Jesus, they're looking for a problem. They're not looking to learn something. They're not looking to be amazed. They're not there watching because they're hoping something will change their life in a positive way that day. They are watching, looking for the flaw. That is one of the most terrifying things, by the way, about my job. I've already told you the hard thing about the song leader's job. The terrifying thing about my job is I sure hope you're looking for the best this morning. I hope you're not disappointed too much by the end of it. But I hope you're not sitting there thinking, I'm waiting. He's going to say something wrong, do something wrong. I'm going to jot that down, and I'm keeping a list. And for Jesus, that was every day for him. Every day there was this group of people around that just wanted to see, where's he going to mess up today? So here he is in the synagogue with this guy with the withered hand. One other thing that I want you to notice before we move to the next verse. What should they be in the synagogue to do? What's the purpose of going to the synagogue? The synagogue, the word basically in Greek is the idea of gathering together. They are there, supposed to be there, gathered together for worship. They're supposed to be there for God. And they have so focused in on trying to find the flaw in Jesus, they've forgotten the reason the synagogue exists in the first place. So verse 3, it says, he said to the man with the withered hand, come here. And he said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill? But they were silent. They don't have an answer for that, because how do you answer that question in a way that can continue this trap you're trying to set for Jesus? How can you answer that question in a way that sounds reasonable? Because they have all these rules about the Sabbath. We talked last time, there were 39 activities that you could not do on the Sabbath. Interesting here that they're just looking for that in Jesus. And so Jesus, he knows. And so he asks them a question that forces them to look back at themselves. And then he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. There is about as much going on in this verse as in any verse we'll read. A lot of things. One, he looks around in anger. We don't see Jesus described as being angry very often, do we? Now, sometimes we can tell by the things he's saying there must be at least a little bit of anger there. But usually when we think of the anger of Jesus, what do we think of? We think of him coming into the temple, flipping over the tables of the money changers. And that's kind of the place we go. He's angry here with these people in the synagogue because they're there for the wrong reason, because they're not willing to engage him in conversation about the thing they think they're there for. And more than that, he's angry with them because the hardness of their heart. Their hearts are hardened. They have already decided what they're going to do. And when we think of hardness of heart, generally what comes to mind? Pharaoh. All the way back in the days of Moses and the plagues, we find Pharaoh sometimes with his heart hardened, sometimes with God working on that. He is unwilling to change. And Jesus, as he comes into the synagogue, his entire purpose is changing people, isn't it? He's going to change people physically. He's going to change people spiritually. And they are just unwilling to budge from where they're at. And when we find ourselves unwilling to even consider other things, oftentimes we miss out on things that are good. They're going to miss out on everything that Jesus is doing. One other thing I want you to notice from that verse, the way he's going to go about healing this man. Jesus heals in all kinds of different ways. There are times where he will find someone and he'll tell them, go to the pool and wash, and he'll expect them to get up and go and do something. There's a time in John 9 where he'll heal a blind man, and he'll make this mud on the ground and put it in his eyes and tell him to go wash that off. And there's a lot of activity going on. But here, he just speaks. Of all those 39 activities that Jews couldn't do on the Sabbath, talking was not a problem. And so even as Jesus is healing on the Sabbath, and they're going to try to make something more out of it than it is, even here, there's no real work being done because you can't explain what he's doing as work. He's just speaking. And now this guy's going to be healed. So the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him on how to destroy him. Now they want to destroy him. See their reactions over and over again, how they see the amazing thing happening in front of them, but they don't see it. It's right there. How many of us would love to see this happen? I'd love the description. It's pretty generic, but a withered hand. I don't know exactly what that looks like, My hand over the weekend has been a combination of dry because we live in Oklahoma, and I find myself using way more hand lotion than any man should use. It has been cut in little places because I put all the Christmas stuff in the attic yesterday. And every time I do that, I somehow manage to find my way into some fiberglass along the way, and then I just feel like there's constantly something going on there. And I think of how great would it be to put my hand in this pocket for a minute and to take it back out and everything to be fine again, and how minor all of that is. This guy with a hand that is withered somehow, and I don't know exactly what that looks like, but is suddenly made whole. If you witnessed that happen, what would your takeaway be? How would you feel? How would you tell the story to others? How would you react? And yet their reaction is not amazement. Their reaction is not, we need to know more about this guy. Their reaction is exactly as it was when they got there. We have already decided. The world around us, all those people that I mentioned at the beginning of our time, commenting on all these stories, all these Facebook ads about the Bible or about sermon prep or all these, they've already decided. There is nothing within there that they feel like is going to change their mind. That's the difficulty we have in going out and trying to reach that world for Jesus. They feel like they've already decided. And so many of them will be just like these religious leaders. You could say whatever you want to say, do whatever you want to do, and nothing is going to change. But some of them it will get through, and we'll see that throughout the chapter 2. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed. From Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan, and from around Tyre and Sidon. And when the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. Now this I like. Finally we get a group of people that's doing the right thing. They've heard what he does, they've heard his teaching, they've seen things happen, and so all they can do is try to get closer. And isn't that what we want this morning? We know who Jesus is and what he does. We know the sacrifice that's been made for us that we just remembered a few minutes ago. And what we desperately want to do is just to get closer. Not to trap him like the religious leaders did, but because we want to know more. We want to be closer to him. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. They wanted contact. They wanted to get as close as they could. And maybe there are people in the world, people in our lives that we've felt like this about, that we just wish we could get a little bit closer to them, to learn a little more about them. And Jesus should very much top the list for us. We should want to be as close to him as we can. And yet, what kind of questions do Christians ask? Is this sinful or not? When I was a youth minister, the question I would get so often, especially when it came to dating and relationships, how far is too far? That was the question, because we just want to be out there on the edge, far enough away that we're enjoying life in the way the world tells us to, but close enough that we're okay with Jesus. And yet what we learn from this crowd is what we need to be, which is we want to get as close to him as we can get. We don't want social distance from Jesus. We want to be right there, right beside him, and learning about who he is and what he wants us to be. And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. The unclean spirits, they fell down before him. What a weird story here in Mark 2, where you have a group of religious leaders and scribes and people that know Scripture well, that the only reason they're there is to try to find a flaw. You have a group of just regular folks in between, and all they want to do is get close enough to be affected by him and to figure out exactly what he's all about. And then the group that is completely opposite him, spiritually speaking, and even they acknowledge who he is. They can see it. And the reason they can see it is because they're in a place where it's undeniable. And so often that's what it takes for people in life, is to reach that point where you just can no longer deny who Jesus is. They see him and they confess his name. And he went up on the mountain, verse 13, and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. He calls this group of apostles. We'll not go through the part of the chapter where it lists them off and tells about where they came from. But when they got that call, they followed. They came to him, and then for the next years of their lives, they would try to stay as close to him as they could as they learn more about who he is and learn more about who they could be. Down to verse 20, it says he went home, and the crowd gathered again so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, he is out of his mind. They went out to seize him, and we have a whole other group of they this time. It's his family. And his family's had enough of all this Son of God talk and healing, and none of that makes sense because this is Jesus who's grown up along beside us. And they don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to them at all. So they want to put an end to all this talk. And we will experience that in our lives. There are people around us that they could care less that we're here right now doing what we do. They think it's silly and a waste of time. They don't understand why we care. They just don't want to hear about it. They just don't want to be bothered with it. You just do your religion thing, keep it to yourself, but don't bring it out here. But Jesus wasn't content to do things that way. Jesus wanted to go and to teach and to heal. And for us, we should never be content with just being here and having our time together and going out there as if nothing has happened. It is up to us to take this out there and to spread that word. And so even as his family didn't understand and the world around us doesn't understand, it doesn't change the work that is to be done. And when the scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, he is possessed by Beelzebub, and by the prince of demons he casts out the demons. So they label him. And they think, okay, if we just say the reason he's able to do these things is it's Satan at work, then everyone will discount him and they won't care about who he is. All those folks who comment things about this being mythology and fiction, and I've seen the belittling one that just drives me crazy lately, and I've seen over and over again in these different Facebook posts is talking about God as being your sky daddy. And every time I see that, it just makes me grit my teeth a little bit. Because I think, how belittling to God is that? But to them, God is nothing to begin with. They just don't see it. They don't understand it. And they feel like, well, if I label it in this way and make it less than it really is, then maybe people dismiss it the way that I do. And we will be labeled too. There was a time where being a Christian, being a churchgoer, or for me, being a minister, was a good thing in society. There was a time where people were looked up to for having that kind of commitment and something like that they cared about. And now that has begun to shift in our world. And now people look at us and just kind of shake their head. What's wrong with those people? We have been labeled in that way. And yet we carry on doing what we do and taking the message to others. So he called them to him and said to them in parables. He's been labeled as doing these things because of Satan, and he says to them, how can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. Their conclusion does not make sense, is basically what he's saying within this parable. And I will tell you, when you look at the world who tries to label and belittle God and the Bible and Christianity and the things that we do and the time that we spend here, I will tell you that conclusion does not make sense. It does not matter how many of them say it. It does not matter how loud they are. It does not matter how popular the view is. It absolutely does not make sense. To look around this world and to think all of this just happened absolutely does not make sense. To look around this world and think there was a Jewish carpenter who came out of a marriage that had a questionable side to it and a lot of rumors around them because Jesus is conceived before that marriage was a marriage, and they probably had to listen to whispers for years and years. To think that that person could change the world at a level that 2,000 years later, here we are. To think that that person, who people tried to say was not the Son of God, had followers who followed him closely and watched what he did and heard what he taught, that believed it so fully that they were willing to all go to their death for it, does not make sense. To think of all the variety in the world of creation just happened out of some gases coming together and exploding does not make sense. To think of all of the things in our world that are exactly as they must be to sustain life does not make sense. And to think that Jesus walks into the synagogue of all places, heals, casts out demons who supposedly are on his team according to them, does not make any sense. And for so many people in life, they have tried to explain all of this do all of this in such a way that eventually reach a point that just say, this just doesn't really make a lot of sense. How many times have we tried to take things on ourselves and assume we could fix them and make them right, and then at some point in the midst of it realize we need the help of God in this. We need the help of our brothers and sisters in this, because the way we're trying to do it doesn't make sense, and then we find ourselves right back there again doing it again. Jesus says to them, the explanation you're coming up with, step back from it for a minute. Are we willing to listen and learn? I guarantee you, with the administration that is going out of office right now and the one that is coming into office right now, if we could list a whole lot of things that each of them have said and put them on a page without any name attached to them, I guarantee you everyone in this room would eventually come to one from the guy you think you oppose that you agree with something they've said. And when I were to tell you that it was that person who said it, it would shock you, and then suddenly you wouldn't be quite as sure you agreed with it anymore. This is how people approach Jesus. And what Jesus says to them is, it does not make sense to operate that way. There are things I'm saying that if you were willing to step back and forget that you were trying to trap me, forget that you decided I needed to be destroyed, if you heard this from someone else, if you saw someone else doing this, it would be fine. But because it's me, you're unwilling to listen. This division just cannot stand. So the question comes to us. I think it's the same question everybody in Mark 3 had to ask. What will you do with Jesus? I love that old song from the songbook. What will you do with Jesus, my friend? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, oh friend, what will he do with me? You cannot be neutral on this. The folks in Mark 3, they weren't neutral. The demons knew exactly who he was. The man whose hand was healed, his life was changed forever. The people who had already decided he must be bad weren't going to be swayed from that. And the people who wanted to follow him, they would be so sad when he finally left. They all had made a decision about Jesus. And so if you're here this morning and you have not made a decision about Jesus, if you're watching online and you have not, I will tell you neutral is the one place you can't be. You cannot be neutral about Jesus. You either have to accept or deny somewhere along the way. And if you have denied in the past, let me ask you the same thing that he would ask you in this chapter, which is, does that make sense? Does it make sense to deny him for the reasons that you have? Or if you were willing to step back and look at it again, could you see something different in him? This morning, I hope we're a church body that is united in thought, that body that's divided against itself cannot stand. And for us, as we are united in him, know that we are also united in the fact that we don't always do this right. And for those of us who may need to confess something to one another, let this be the day that you're not neutral on that either. That you can confess the place that you need to change, and that we as your church family can help you along with that. Or if you just need the prayers of the church, if there's something we can do for you, we would love to help with that too. If there is any way you need to change your life, do not stay neutral this morning. Come to Jesus as we stand and sing.